Hello and welcome to the Maxi-Geek Show. Today is Friday the 13th, and as it is apparently the scary day, it has proven to be a technological nightmare. We first went live, the camera wasn't working, but it was working in the setup phase, and I've just spent the last 20 minutes talking with the microphone completely muted and didn't realize. So, let's go over the stories of the week again. Early this week, we got the first proper gameplay of Gotham Knights, thanks to a new video that was released by Warner Brothers Games, showcasing off Nightwing and Red Hood in action. Let me just jump in here. So one of the things that we get to see, obviously, is them playing. Doing it is a co-op video. What is interesting as part of the news that they revealed is that the game is no longer coming to Xbox One or PlayStation 4. So that means that if you're somebody who has a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox One and you've been waiting for this game because it was announced over 2 years ago, and you're unable to get a modern, the newer consoles because of a lack of availability, and you wanted to play this game, that's it. You're out of luck. There's nothing that you can do. There's no plans for this game to come. It's not that it's going to come 6 months later. They're focusing on next gen first. This game is no longer in development for Xbox 360 or PlayStation 4. There was no specific reason given, but I suspect that they saw the performance that they were getting on the last generation versions based on the design, the product they wanted to develop, and they just weren't getting the right performance or the right look from it. And obviously, as we've seen with the Crackdown release, games that are made for cross-generational devices can sometimes be, less than stellar if one side is prioritized over the other. And for whatever reason, they just decided to completely ignore the previous generation and just say, no, we're focusing on next gen only. What we do have as well is that there is a couple of ways to get the game. The first is through the standard edition, which is just the game. The second is the deluxe edition, which comes with a few in-game items as well as some additional suits and gear. And then if you have a spare $500, you can get the collector's edition, which is being shown on the screen. And the collector's edition offers up, a map, a mini art book, an augmented reality key, the same in-game content as the deluxe edition, but also, as you can see there, the $500 kit gets you this amazing statue that features Nightwing, Red Hood, Batgirl, and Robin. The bizarre thing is it is inspired by Jim Lee, not designed by Jim Lee. So they could have gone out of their way and had him design, a pose for the four of them. It could have been all individual artwork, and then they, do it. They didn't have to have him, sculpt the maquette or anything. But for whatever reason, they've decided that it's going to be that way, where they took inspiration from the work that he's done. And if you're a comics fan, Jim Lee is a very, very big name in the world of DC Comics. If you don't follow comics, the name has no relevance to you, and therefore this being inspired by him, it makes no sense. The fact that it is a $500 kit, though, is weird because we've seen this before. We've seen this a lot lately with these games that come out with these insane statues and things. They sit on the shelves. I have up behind me, on that side of me, the Cyberpunk Collector's Edition. That was like $450 when it launched, and like 3 months later, it was like 50% off because people just couldn't sell it because the game bombed, but they couldn't sell them because it was too expensive. It just didn't make sense. So, yeah. The game obviously is looking good on the PS5 and Xbox Series X platforms, but it is no longer coming to the older generations. Moving on from the world of make-believe, let's move into the world of make-believe in terms of football, or, as we call it here in Australia, soccer. And the big news that EA is no longer developing games with the FIFA branding, at least starting next year. So one of the things that we sort of knew was coming from a lot of back channel talking last year, and the EA CEO Andrew Wilson saying about how they were looking at the license agreement, the deal that they had with the FIFA organisation, and they announced earlier this week that FIFA as a brand will no longer be developed by EA, and starting next year it will just be called EA Sports FC. Whether FC stands for football club or something else, they've not said. As you can see in the imagery, one of the things they have it as CF, which makes sense for it to be, you know, club football, because it's Real Madrid. Speaking of Real Madrid, you know, Manchester United, Stratford, yeah, you know, those clubs have come on board. So both the men's and women's teams have come on board. We've seen stadiums come on board. We've seen brands like Nike come on board to say that, you know, they're licensed. Officially, there is 19,000 athletes across 700 teams with over 100 stadiums and 30 leagues from around the world being included in this game. So all the modes that are in this year's FIFA game that's still to be released or to be formally announced will be available going forward in the next one. So Volta, which is the street football and all those sort of things, they'll still be around. They're not getting rid of any of that. They're just basically saying there will no longer be any FIFA name attached to it. So yeah, it obviously is a little weird they're doing it. It obviously, you know, mostly because it's such an iconic branding name. You know, EA Sports FIFA, you know, pick your number. It's been a big thing for a number of years in the industry. The reports last year were that the FIFA governing body were looking for a few extra $1 billion for, you know, to continue the exclusive license. They don't do anything, the FIFA body, in terms of game development. They have nothing to do with that. EA still have to go out to all the clubs themselves and scan everything. So it makes no sense to pay somebody for a license when they're not actually contributing to the development. Interestingly, though, the FIFA organization have come out since and said that they will be releasing their own FIFA game next year, but it will not come with hookers or blackjack. Like, you know, that's a bit of a joke there from Futurama. But it will have, you know, the fully licensed and authentic FIFA experience next year will be done by the FIFA organization. I question their ability to get a studio on board and get a game up and running and released within, you know, 15 months if they want to release this by, like, say, August next year, and have it at the same level of quality that everyone who currently knows the FIFA brand for sports games, for video games, you know, knows what to expect. I don't see it happening that way, purely because I just don't think... Yeah, Tabs. Twitch has a bit of a weird thing. If you start and stop within a few minutes, it doesn't send out a notification again. It's been an interesting run because I had issues with the camera when I fixed those. When I went off stream and came back on again, I didn't unmute the microphone, so I spent 20 minutes talking and there was no microphone. So, well, that was what I was saying before when I had my microphone not working. Is that, you know, Konami's been essentially the competitor to the FIFA brand, or the EA Sports FIFA brand game for a number of years, and even they've managed to flub it spectacularly, you know, with their most recent entry. And for years, you know, Pro Evolution Soccer and FIFA, it went back and forth. You know, FIFA would bring in, or I keep saying FIFA, EA Sports would bring in changes to the game and people wouldn't like it, but then Pro Evolution Soccer would come in with, you know, making enhancements here and there. And that would then cause the FIFA guys, the teams at EA who develop FIFA, to pick up their game, which would make that experience better, and that in turn would drive the Pro Evolution Soccer people, you know, to do better. Whether or not FIFA reaches out to Konami and says, hey, you know, do you want to develop the new officially licensed FIFA game going forward? Maybe they will. Maybe that's going to be their way to get around trying to find a development studio and get a game done in 15 months. I don't think it will release next year, and if it does, it won't be fun to play. It'll just be more of a dumpster fire. That's the nicest way I can put that. So yeah, it is interesting that they're doing it that way. But you know, these things happen all the time. Deals come and go. You know, we see it all the time in the world of video games, mostly with music, with licensed songs. You know, things like Forza Horizon 3. You know, that game is no longer available for sale because the license agreement for a lot of the tracks in the game have expired. So they could either redevelop the game to remove those songs or just pull the game from sale. So, moving into the world of tech, though, as I said earlier, we've got some happy news and some sad news. The happy news is that Microsoft are bringing to market later in the year a range of accessories for those with physical disabilities. So, as part of Microsoft's all-inclusive, mantra, if you will, to allow people of all sorts of, ability to operate and use devices that they create. We've seen it before with the Xbox Adaptive Controller, and they're doing it with the Surface Adaptive Kit, which is basically a bunch of stickers for laptops. Later this year, they're releasing 3 devices as part of the Adaptive Accessories line. So the Adaptive Accessories line has 3 parts. So there is the mouse, which is the black square here on the left of the screen. And then there is the connection bar here, which is kind of like just kind of looks like a giant eraser. And then there's the black button. What makes these special is that the mouse itself, you can buy it as is in this form factor, and that's it. That's all you need. It'll work as a mouse exactly as it looks. But Microsoft themselves have developed some 3D printed models that you can print out and snap this into or around, as you can see on the right. Or if you need something more specific for your use, for whatever impairment you may have, you can custom design and 3D print your own. So it isn't that you have to either use it bland like that or with one of the presets. You can use it on its own completely. They also are selling an option, and the picture is up here, of what they call the mouse tail. And the mouse tail turns it into more of a traditional style mouse. So the one up here in the top left corner, that is very similar to my Logitech MX3 that I've been using for years now. But if you're like me and you're right-handed, that works for you. But if you're a left-handed person, there are not a lot of left-handed mice around. You can't just go to JB Hi-Fi, see mice on the shelf and go, cool, that's a right-handed mouse, that's the left-handed option. The mouse tail swaps that. So it puts a thumb rest on the right side of the mouse for your thumb from your left hand. As I said, the giant eraser-looking thing, the bar, what this allows you to do is to connect older devices. So if you're someone who has been using a computer for years and you've had a piece of hardware that was designed 15, 16 years ago to work for you and it is still working for you, this device allows you to bring that to a modern computer without any sort of having to worry about running cables from it to your computer, because it connects via Bluetooth. So this device allows you to plug in through USB ports on the front and side of the devices, and then have this device talk to the computer for you. The third option that they're doing is what they're calling this big button box. And what is interesting about that is, as you can see here on the left, it does support a range of additional add-ons. Again, none of which are provided by Microsoft. You can get the basics design, so the big button, the D-pad, and the joystick. But if you need something a bit different, you can just 3D print your own. So we've seen, on the right side, the black one is sort of it's a concaved sort of button. But a 3D printed option exists over here where it's concurved. And then same with the sort of more traditional D-pad look. And then obviously you've got the one here on the far left that looks like a Dyson Airblade. And that is more designed for people that can't grip, but they can put their hand in it and then still go left and right. And the button, the big black box itself supports up to 8 button presses. Now it's not a one-for-one thing, so moving pressing the up button on it does not make the arrow key go up. It can do that, or you can optimize it. You can program it and have it say, if I push up, it's going to be Control C, or Control V, or it's going to be Control Shift, S for something in Photoshop. So because it's a macro enabled button, it means that going forward, if you need it, you can have it do a single function, or you can have it do a series of commands to allow you to do additional functionality inside of whatever program you happen to be using. I think this is a great piece of work from Microsoft. They've really sort of stepping up and developing tools, not just because they can and say, hey, look what we did, look how awesome we are, but it's more a matter of they're developing things for the user. And again, with this, they did come out and develop this in conjunction with their ability department that they have, that is staffed with people with actual disabilities, and then various community groups and support groups throughout the US, like they did with the adaptive controller. So it is a very cool thing that they're doing. When it releases, we don't yet know, and what the prices are going to be, we don't yet know. The adaptive Xbox controller is about $130 for the base unit, and then you've got to buy or provide the the additional input options yourself. And the Surface adaptive kit, which are the stickers, that's like $25. So they're not pricing these things in the extreme range of everything, but I wouldn't imagine it's going to be a very cheap setup, especially if you have to 3D print your own unique accessory connections. Moving on in the world of tech from something good to something sad, and that is that Apple have announced that the iPod is officially being discontinued. So it is 21 years old this year, the iPod. So the iPod released 21 years ago, so that makes it 2001. To put into terms for me, I was still in high school then. When it was released, it was the white box here you can see on the left with the giant wheel and the buttons. And then, it shrunk down, then it came with a color screen, then it went to, sort of a very iPhone-looking screen, then it went to the Mini, there's a thing, and then obviously now the current one is the iPod Touch, which is basically an iPhone without the phone capability. What I'll do, I'll put this on this commercial because I think it's hilarious. This is the very first iPod commercial, from when this released. So it's not that, they're no longer selling them. The items themselves will still be around. You can tell this is old because this guy has CDs on his desk, and look at the MacBook he's using. Sorry, I stand corrected. It's not even a MacBook, it's an iBook. That's how you know it's old. So yeah, they're still selling them. So if you go into JB Hi-Fi or one of the Apple stores around the country, even go to apple.com, you can still buy the iPod Touch in its various configurations that they have. But if you go in wanting a blue one with 256 gigabytes of storage and they say, sorry, we don't have that in stock, they can't get it. If you go to the website to try and find a particular combination and it doesn't exist, it's done. So what they've said is basically once the current stock is sold, that is it. They're not making any more. They've said that they're discontinuing it purely because iPod is now a part of every iPhone and iPad. It's a part of your Apple Watch if you have one. It's on your Apple TV through the Music app, and it's in the HomePod systems that they have as well. So it is literally in every other device they make, and obviously iTunes on the computer or Apple Music via the website if you do it that way. So it is available everywhere. So they sort of decided, hey, we don't need to mass produce another piece of hardware that we're not really selling anymore. So I said a bit of sad news there because they're doing not getting away with everything, but they're they're doing away with basically an icon of the music world, if you will. So yeah, a bit sad, but it is what it is. Moving on to some interesting news, we had another Indie World event during the week, and from it we had 4 games released as part of it, as what they call the old Shadow Drop. So the games themselves, Gibbon Beyond the Trees, Soundfall, Mini Motorways, and Opus Echoes of Star Song Full Bloom Edition. That last one is a visual novel. It's there. What is interesting is Soundfall. I got to play that game back at PAX 2018. The developers themselves, from Drastic Games, they just started up. They had basically an alpha build of the game. They flew down to PAX Australia. They set up shop at one of the indie little booths in the indie area, and had people playing off their own laptops, as most indie developers do, to say, hey, this is the game we've made, and it's now available for purchase. And it isn't just on Switches, it's on all the platforms as well. So yeah, it is a very interesting addition to it. Moving on to the other content that was shown, we have some release dates for some of the games in this list, and some, for 2023. So we're just going to fly through these now. So the first game coming out in terms of, so this is all in sort of a release order, a current release order. So on June 2, Card Shark will release for both Switch and PC. We will have a preview going up for that in the next day or so. We've had one of the guys here playing it for the last week on PC. Then in June we have Silt. Silt was announced last year during the IGN Summer of Gaming. It was also at the Gamescom event and then a Future Games Showcase. So it did do the rounds sort of, in the winter months last year for us. For PC and PlayStation, it's now announced for Switch. It does look very cool. You're somebody who's surviving on a planet that's completely submerged. There's no dry land for you to go on. But in order to get supplies, you've got to go, south. And the further you go down, the darker it gets. And, there are some things that live in the dark that, are very, very hazardous to your health. So there's that one. On July 21st, Wayward Strand is set to release for all platforms. So that's PC, Switch, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X and S. And it is a Melbourne-developed game set in Australia in the 70s, where you play as Casey, a 14-year-old girl who is inspired to be a journalist, who ventures onto this airship that acts as sort of a hospital that flies around. I called it, when it was announced, I called it Air Country Practice. Not A Country, but Air, A-I-R. And it's been stuck in my head as that's what it's officially called ever since. The interesting mechanic for this, though, is that it isn't just that, you walk around and talk to people. It's while you're at one end of the airship talking to somebody, conversations are still happening at the other end of the airship. So you could spend the entire game at the very front of the ship and you don't know what happens on the middle or the rear, but you also don't know what happens on the decks above or below you. But at the same time, as you're walking, if you're trying to follow somebody down a corridor, you could actually hear somebody talking in a room, and that's another conversation. So the game will require replay in order to sort of fully appreciate everything that's in there. And there's roughly 20,000 lines of dialogue throughout the game, so it is a big one. On August 25, Idle Manager from PlaySim is coming to Switch. It is available now on PC. And then now we're moving into Undated. So these are sometime this winter. So totally accurate battle simulator. One Shot World Machine Edition. We Are OFK. Ooblets. Alakhead. And Curse to Golf are all sometime this winter. Curse to Golf we've seen a number of times. Alakhead we saw last year during a Japanese-led development stream. I can't remember who it was that it was branded for. It's very Mega Man-ish in its style. Basically, your head is a battery, and when you connect your head to something, or your body if your head is connected, you can power up devices. You can see that in the screens where everything is yellow. But you can also throw your head. So if you need to power up something above you to open up a door to get through, you then have 10 seconds to get back before your head explodes if it doesn't reconnect to the body. So that looks pretty cool. Later in the year, Bethesda Lost Heaven is coming to Switch. We already knew that. I don't know why they're calling it an announcement trailer. It was announced ages ago for Switch. A Guidebook of Babel is also coming. And then later in the year, sometime around the holiday period, is Wild Frost from Chucklefish. And then Cult of Lamb, which is another Melbourne-developed game. That is a sort of roguelike-ish survival game-ish. And then the newer ones that we sort of heard about were Gunbrella, which is coming to PC as well in 2023. This is from the developers behind Gato Robo. It is a side-scrolling action noir game where you have somebody who has an umbrella but is also a gun, therefore the name Gunbrella. And then from developer Aggro Crab is a game called Another Crab's Treasure, where it's all about you as a little crab trying to make your way home, but your shell was stolen, so you have to make do with various bits of trash and stuff that are around the place in order to, have a chance at surviving. Without a shell, a crab is pretty much, fresh meat, as it were. The interesting thing about Another Crab is the developer name is called Aggro Crab, and they announced a game. They released a game, their first game, called Going Down. It was sort of it was a parody of what it is like to work in a corporate office, but it was a roguelike game where, you know, every time you died, everything rearranged itself. They also, when Team 17 announced that they were doing NFTs, and everyone just kind of went, "Are you mental?" The developers at Aggro Crab came out and basically said, "Screw them, they're shit, we're never working with them again, nobody else should ever work with them." So that's where they sort of got a bit of popularity from that, and this is their first game. And the reason why it has a crab in it is because apparently people got really annoyed with them for being a developer called Aggro Crab, and their first game wasn't about crabs. So yeah, that's what they've decided to do, is to focus on crabs in this new game. Moving on to some sad news, or some release date news. And the first bit is that Starfield has been delayed. So when Starfield was officially unveiled last year at the Xbox and Bethesda Game Showcase, they dated it for November 11th, 2022, so later this year. Since then, we've had a number of what they call Constellation updates. So they have a membership. It's a free thing, but it's a membership program. If you sign up, they'll send you, YouTube videos and such, a few days before they're publicly available, as part of what they call a Constellation program. So we've had some stuff from there, but they've also been doing these sort of, not roundtables, but developer chats, if you will, where they've had, people that do story talking to other people that do story. The most recent one was about the music of the game. And Inon Zur, who's done a lot of work with Bethesda over the years, is developing the score for this game. And they were talking back and forth about the music. The fact, though, that we hadn't seen any gameplay isn't unsurprising. So a lot of people have said, hey, Starfield was going to get delayed because we hadn't seen anything. We never saw anything about Fallout 4 until the E3, and then it released that November. So it was literally like a 5-month window between it being formally announced and it releasing. So Starfield being announced and then not seeing anything on it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But the other half of the news that they announced is that Redfall is also being delayed. And Redfall, when it was announced last year, again at the Xbox Bethesda showcase, that was dated for winter, for us, winter 2022. So sometime between June and the end of August this year. It is now delayed into 2023 as well. And the reason why these were delayed, at least my guess on them, is it's a Microsoft decision. Microsoft have learned in the past not to release bad games. It's bitten them in the ass before with a few games over the years. They delayed Halo, right? The game they were basically pushing people to buy an Xbox Series X for. They delayed it like 4 or 5 weeks before the console launched to say, hey, we're not happy with the state of the game. We're delaying it for another 12 months. People got pissed, but when the game released, the vast majority of people were very, very happy with the experience. So, Microsoft and Xbox have learnt over the years to delay things if they know it's not going to be right when it releases. Bethesda haven't had that exact same thought pattern before, especially the Bethesda Game Studios titles. Skyrim released, and of course with, it's a Bethesda game, so it has to be buggy. It didn't launch in the best state. And then more recently, Fallout 4 had issues when it launched. Fallout 76 was, launched and, internationally panned. It was not well received at all. So them delaying Starfield, I guarantee you, is more of a Microsoft decision to say, hey, we want to make sure when this game launches, because we're saying this is, a game to have an Xbox for, that it has to be the best it is. And I guarantee you the Bethesda team just kind of went, hey, you know what? We've never really had that option before, so we're going to take the most of it. As for Redfall, the game, as I said, was announced last year at the showcase, and since then we've seen nothing. Not saying we've seen very little, I'm saying we've seen nothing. There's been no art for the game shown off. There's been no talk about the game. There's been nothing. So it is being developed by Arcane Austin, which is the same development studio behind that did Prey and Dishonored 2. But then, there's been nothing. So this one being delayed makes sense because we've not seen anything, and it was apparently due to release in the next few months. It is a bit sad that they're doing it. You know, Arcane did release a sort of tack-on statement to it, just basically saying, hey, you know, we need more time, which makes perfect sense. For Starfield, they did come out and just say, hey, we need some more time as well. So it's literally the same thing from both Bethesda Game Studios and Arcane Austin to say we need more time. As I said, I honestly think it was a Microsoft thing, because Bethesda haven't traditionally delayed games like that before. The most recent game, Ghostwire Tokyo, was delayed from 2021 into 2022, but that was a bit of a rare thing. That wasn't the standard for Bethesda games before. Obviously, Doom got delayed as well, and we obviously saw some carry-on, some flow-on effects from the DLC from the pandemic. But their traditional MO isn't to delay games, but is to release it and then patch it later, which we've seen now Microsoft is not willing to do, which I think is a good thing. I honestly think that, you know, if Microsoft want these games to be the reason that people buy an Xbox, even if it is just for Game Pass, that, you know, these games be the best they can be out of the gate to ensure that, you know, it justifies the purchase, because these consoles aren't cheap. So if you're buying a console for Starfield, you know, it's a busted game, you're not going to be very happy. So, yeah, I think it's good news. Obviously, it is sad news, but it is good news nonetheless. Moving on to the world of Mario, we got the overview trailer for Mario Strikers Battle League Football, which is the full name here in Australia. For some reason, they tacked the word football onto the end of it, as if the you know, imagery wasn't football or soccer related enough. What is interesting is, I won't play the video because it requires you to be able to listen to it. In the video, they say over and over again that the rules do not apply here. One of the things they show off is that you can tackle members of your own team, and if you do so, you'll give them a boost. So in one of the shots, Mario basically runs up and then fly kicks Bowser in the back. I think it was Bowser, maybe in Luigi. Can't remember now. And he gets a big shunt forward, you know, gain some ground on the pitch. It is interesting. Obviously, with all the gear and, you know, the leagues and all that, there's going to be a lot of people, you know, diving into this. You know, it could be very fun. It is definitely worth, you know, a watch if you're, you know, somebody who's interested in this game. Nintendo did describe it the other day as soccer with martial arts, which I thought was a little bit of a weird way of describing a soccer game, because you can't just run around and just start kicking people in the head. You know, it's still based in the world of soccer. It's just the Mario version of soccer. So the martial arts tag was a little confusing, but I suppose it does generate, you know, a talking point about, well, this is why it's got martial arts, you know, the martial arts tag on it. But yeah, so that one is coming out on June 10th, so we're about a month away from that one. It is interesting that there's no game from Nintendo in May. We've generally seen them do games in sort of every month in some way, but so far this month there's literally nothing from Nintendo. We did just get the announcement today that Kirby 64, or Kirby and the Crystal Shards, depending on how you want to call it, is launching on Nintendo Switch Online next week. But that's it. That's not a full game. That's just Nintendo releasing another NSO title. Yeah, it looks interesting. Whether or not it you know, plays good, we'll have to wait and see. The last game did release on the Wii and obviously the GameCube, so this is the third in the series. We just have to wait and see if it's going to be any good. Speaking of waiting, we have to wait a little bit longer for the Dead Space remake. So overnight, the team at Motive Studios hosted yet another live stream for their remake of Dead Space, this time focusing on the art. So a few months ago, they hosted one as well, which is all focused on the audio. And in that, for example, they talked about how in the original game, when Isaac, you know, was running out of oxygen and he made it back into the Ishimura, he would pant. He'd be choking, gasping for air as he's going in. But once the door repressurized, he was fine. There wasn't a single problem. He was great. So you know, enhancing the audio through that way. Over on this stream, however, it was all about the art. It's all about the look of the game. But part of the announcement was that the game is now set for January 27th. So in the last stream, they did say it would no longer be releasing this year. It would be early 2023. And now we know when. So The game was speculated to release, sometime this October or November. They have now said no, it is going to release in early 2023, specifically January 27th. So that just means, it's a bit of a, it's an Australia Day special, if you will. What they have done, though, is released what they call the atmospheric walkthrough. So the live stream is below. It goes for an hour and a half. There's a lot of technical, talk about why they've done things and how they've tried to make the enhancements feel organic, not just like a fancy version of what was there before. But they also then split everything up into different things. So one's focusing on the character art, one's focusing on the world art. So they're all available on their YouTube channel. But they released this one, and this is sort of just a general sense of the world. As you're walking, as you're playing the game, this is sort of what you'll experience. Obviously, there is audio attached to it. I'm not putting that in here because of copyright stuff. But yeah, I watched this earlier, and it is honestly quite spectacular. I look at it and I just see the same Dead Space from a decade ago. I'm not looking at it going, oh, this looks so much better. But that's because this is more about the atmosphere, and the atmosphere of the original Dead Space was honestly quite spectacular. I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm just saying that it had that tension to it, and that's what they were trying to evoke in this one. Is that it's more about this is how everything looks when you're in this space, which I think again they nailed it, which is why I'm looking at it going, it looks about the same as I remember it. But that's because my memory was more about the atmosphere, not the visuals. So yeah, it is interesting that the game is now set for late January. Traditionally, EA have never released games in that time of year, but it does make sense because we've seen that they released Battlefield last year. They delayed it 5 or 6 weeks, and it didn't land. People did not like the experience when it launched. They still don't like it now, and the developers are struggling to try and correct what they did do. So it doesn't surprise me that they've delayed this one to make sure the team have as much time as they need for it. But yeah, it's interesting. EA, though they're not without games this year. Need for Speed is coming. We did learn the other day that there is another remake of something on the way. What that is, we don't yet know. And we do know that they've got another partner game, so probably something from the EA Originals banner. Something else coming along down the line as well. Just a few quick small stories before we get into our forecast for the next week. We learnt early this morning that Alan Wake Remastered is coming to Switch. So if I can just... So we didn't get any details about it. We do know it is running natively on the Switch. You can see them here playing it on a Switch Lite. It is very, very choppy in this footage, or like 6 seconds of it. But it is coming. It's not a cloud version. It will be a native port to the Switch, which is interesting because they didn't do that for the Control on Switch is a cloud version, which obviously doesn't work here in Australia because we don't have the necessary hardware to run it. But yeah, so it is interesting. It annoyed me this morning, and I did sort of rant a little bit in the story. It is yet just another developer releasing games on other platforms. It either didn't sell as well as they expected, or they thought they could make a quick, easy buck by then now bringing it to Switch. So rather than announcing this for Switch when it was announced for all the other platforms and saying, hey, it is coming to Switch, it's going to be a little bit longer though. It's 7 months after it was released on the other platforms, and now it's coming to Switch, which is, it's been the trend. A lot of games are either made for Switch out of the gate, or the Switch is, considered after the fact and then ported across later. Again, it's one of those things where it's not necessarily a bad thing if developers need more time to make sure that a game on Switch works the best for the platform. I just don't like how they preface it. They basically set up the expectations about, oh, hey, now we've got the time, we're going to work on the Switch version. So that's more what the issue that I have with stuff like this is. Also, earlier this week, we had the Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak digital event. They couldn't call it a direct because they talked about the PC version as well. Obviously, Nintendo aren't in the PC space, just, Switch and mobile. The DLC, or the expansion, is coming on June 30th. We've known that for a while. We got in the full breakdown. We got, the reveal of, some new monsters, some returning monsters. There are events that I have to scroll down and read it now, that they call follower quests. Well, basically, you can have members of, so here's the twins from Kamura Village. You can have members of, the village and the new location come out into the world with you for specific quests. When you complete those things, you'll get some extra swag. Skills skill swap or skill switch is a new thing where you can actually run out and have some attacks. If you're going up against faster monsters, you maybe want some attacks that are a bit quicker, but then if there's a bigger monster around the corner, you can swap to a heavier combat set. It does allow for some more flexibility in that you don't have to keep running back and forth to town and starting hunts over and over again. Obviously, you can only have 2, so there is some limitations there. We also did get to see, the Aurora Somnicath, it's a frost-based monster, and the Magma Almudron is the lava-based one. The Flying Wyvern Seregios. I really wish they just give these monsters, decent, easy to pronounce names. But the Seregios is making a return, and then obviously the Elder Dragon Malzano is there. It was also announced yesterday that EB Games are taking pre-orders for the amiibo for this game as well. We don't know if they're going to end up on the Nintendo store like the ones last year, but so far it is just these ones here. Obviously, as today is Friday the 13th, we're now looking ahead for the next week in games, and there's some bigger ones and some smaller ones. It isn't going to be a very, very busy week. Today, obviously, Friday the 13th, Evil Dead, the game, released. But next week, we've only really got sort of 2 big games. That is Deadcraft from Exceed Games. That is... the best way I can describe it is it's a tower defense game meets Harvest Moon, but it's zombies that you're growing, and the reason why it's called Deadcraft is because you can Frankenstein monsters together to do different functions. It sounds a little weird when I say it like that, but that's what the main sort of hook of the game is, and that's coming to all platforms. And also on the 19th, Vampire the Masquerade Swan Song is coming to most platforms. The Switch version isn't releasing that day; that's coming later in the year. But that's obviously another episode, another entry in the Vampire the Masquerade series, which Activision originally published way back when. I think it was like 2003 when that first was published, and since then there's been a few games released in the sort of world, and this is just the next big one for that. But that's it. That brings us to the end of the show. It is a little truncated this week because of the technical issues and my inability to unmute a microphone. But yeah, so as I said, some interesting news in the world of release dates, games delaying, games getting dates. As I said, it's a little sad to see the iPod going away, but as I said, it is available through every other piece of hardware that Apple make these days, so it makes sense for it to no longer be around. Next week, we will have some previews for some games that are coming out later this year. And I said we will have the Card Shark preview up in the next few days. If you are interested in following Maxi-Geek socially, all the links will be down in the YouTube comments below. Other than that, we will catch you when we're online next Tuesday for the next installment of our Games Bond stream. And then beyond that, we'll be back next Friday for another episode of the Maxi-Geek Show. So until we see you online again, happy gaming.